because I've just had a message saying my internet quality is not very good. So please, oh, thank you very much, Greg. Brilliant. I'll carry on unless I get told by you guys there's any issues. Brilliant. Super. So really exciting presentation. Lovely to see so many people here today, both men and women, and hopefully the ladies on the session will find this really useful to share with partners, family, etc. And the guys, it is quite a heavy session. I'm sure you're, a bit familiar with some of these issues, and I just really want to kind of explore them from, as Jade said, from kind of a nutritional standpoint. What can we do nutritionally to support some of these issues, and what is going on with this difference between men and women and their longevity. So I am the head of nutrition and wellbeing at Super Wellness, so really always keen to get feedback about our sessions and where they could be improved, and really hoping that today you're going to enjoy getting sort of this whole lifestyle approach to supporting your well-being. So just a brief moment on the agenda. This is what we're going to be covering today. I'm going to kind of spend half the time talking about men's health and these top health concerns, and then I'm going to spend the other kind of half, if you like, looking at really practical tips that we've really taken these, looking at kind of common characteristics that seem to run through with lifestyle habits when it comes to men. So hopefully you'll sort of get the vibe, and any questions at all as we go through, either pop them in the chat box, or at the end we'll have about a 10-minute Q&A. So of course you can unmute and have a chat then, whichever suits you best. But if you think of something as you go through, just put it in the chat box. So it's roughly 4 years in the UK that men die earlier than women. And when you look at global statistics, it's up to 5.1 years less. So if you, for instance, look at America, 57% of all those aged 65 and older are female. And when you get to age 85, actually 67% of the population are female. So you can see this real disparity here. And it seems to be well accepted that there's this disparity, but we don't really fully understand why this might be. And physiological reasons seem to be involved and are still really being investigated. There's a lot of investigations into these different physiological characteristics, such as different hormones. But also there's this issues around how men's actual kind of behavior is different, and is this influencing this difference? So we know that men are 3 times more likely to die from suicide than women, which is a pretty scary statistic. And we know also that men are more likely to lose their life earlier from heart attacks and strokes. But what we also perhaps need to look at when we're looking at these issues is they're often less socially connected. They seem to take more risks than women. And an important one is they're much less likely to visit the GP. And looking at some UK stats from the GP patient survey, 37% of men had seen their GP in the past 3 months. This is going back now to 2016, but I mean, even when you look globally, there is this disparity between women seeking healthcare advice and men for the same issues just not going to seek this health advice. And so this was, 37% of men in the last 3 months compared to 53% of women. And another organisation, the Men's Health Forum, showed that 30% of men say they wouldn't take time off for blood in the urine. And really importantly, I think, especially when you look at this suicide issue, 85% wouldn't take time off work for feeling low or down. So perhaps we need to kind of be looking more deeply at the fact that men and women are different. This bit silly joke here, really, I'm sure many of you guys will disagree with this little funny, but I think it's, you know, suggesting that we are very different, and perhaps this kind of difference is what's not fully understood, and maybe we're missing some of these unique needs that we should be looking at when it comes to men. Just another very silly joke. And so reasons that we need to think about when it comes to this mental and emotional well-being is that men seem to have a very low diagnosis rate, but a much higher suicide rate. So perhaps we need to start thinking about why, you know, why this might be. And actually in the UK, this is often affecting younger people, but globally it seems to be affecting all ages. And maybe we should be remembering this kind of old-fashioned view that men feel that they need to perhaps be the stronger person, and so they tend to bottle things up, and perhaps this is therefore a bit of stigma around seeking help. So some of the areas we need to be aware of as colleagues as well as individuals is why the issues, what has happened that might have involve lower mood, anxiety, and requiring some mental and emotional support. So things like issues at work, around things like redundancy, no promotion, maybe, you know, social isolation, having not having colleagues around has made a really big difference for some people. Relationship issues, so personal issues, changes in living arrangements such as divorce, physical health problems, and the consequences of that can hugely affect mood. And it's really important to remember that when we look at mental and emotional health, we're actually looking about maintaining a positive state of well-being, and not just kind of a survival issue. You might have heard of SAD, this seasonal affective disorder, quite important to mention in the UK at the moment, where we're getting much less daylight hours. This can have a huge effect on mood in across male and females, and we really need to kind of recognise that this can, you know, really tip us over if we also didn't have a full positive state of well-being. And so some positive steps to take, remembering that talking, counselling, support agencies, colleagues at work, just speaking to people is really the first step in treating the situation. It then makes it more acceptable to the person, the individual, and people, you know that there's an issue. It may be worth talking to a psychologist who can help you address things like negative thinking, difficulties in relationships, but also things like mental health first aiders and charities. I've just noted a few charities on here that are UK charities, and one that's really interesting is the Calm charity. You might have heard of the other two, but I wasn't familiar with Calm until I did this research, and it's called the Campaign Against Living Miserably, and it's especially for men, focusing on male mental health, and it also gives really good advice on helping male friends, and as well as a nationwide call line. I got their full address at the end. It's the calmzone.net, but I've just got a little slide which has got that on for you. Okay, so the other area that is seems to be disparities between men and women is heart health. And although heart attacks themselves, oh, thank you very much. Jay's just put in your health and wellbeing page as well, and that's got all the full details for Calm on it. So thanks for sharing that, Jade. That's brilliant. Yeah, heart health. Now, why is this, you know, an important issue for guys? Now, heart attacks are kind of typically seen as a men's health issue. And in fact, this is not strictly true. As you're probably well aware, women also suffer from really high levels of heart disease. And heart disease remains the leading cause of death in the UK. But the interesting or worrying thing is that the leading cause of male deaths in the UK is also heart disease, but at a younger age. So from 2001 to 2018, ischemic heart disease was the leading cause of male death from ages 50 to 64 years. So I find that quite, worrying. That is a really, it seems really young now. I'm fast approaching 50. So, we need to be thinking about, why is this? And maybe some of the support we can put in is getting to know some of our markers early on. What are the warning signs for heart disease? So, for instance, hypertension, checking our numbers, making sure we're fully aware of our blood pressure is so important. You can easily get these blood pressure machines and then just be having them in the house and regularly checking your numbers. And making sure as well that we check them at different stages. One of my good friends, she's got very high blood pressure, and when she kind of started regularly checking it and seeing what the triggers were, obviously in negative triggers such as caffeine and stress, but also she discovered, that running had a huge effect on lowering her numbers, on improving those numbers. So you can kind of do both with getting one of these machines. So really cheap, really effective, and just getting to know what your own levels are and what's good for you, and just tracking that back against the British Heart Foundation's figures. Oh yeah, Greg's knows that work is a trigger for high blood pressure. Well, this is the thing. But of course, if you can manage this with some de-stressing activities, then that can be a really great way of keeping it manageable. Knowing that knowing that work is a trigger is huge. It's massive. So how can you undo it? In fact, my colleague that has high blood pressure, I won't tell you who she works for, but nevertheless, she is, she's making huge changes by never ran before, but just by seeing the difference has really motivated her. Looking at cholesterol, we all know that cholesterol could be a marker for poor heart health, but maybe not in isolation. Maybe it's not enough information in isolation. We really need to know our HDL, our LDL, and ideally we could do with knowing our triglycerides as well. Knowing, the differences here, knowing that we really want to have this improved good cholesterol, and that needs to be better than our LDL, our bad cholesterol. I always remember it as happy and lousy, got to be honest. That's how I was taught. And it really is about not taking these in isolation. And looking kind of further with your blood pressure markers. Ideally, as I say, if you can get your triglycerides, if you can get those markers, and potentially also things like your blood glucose levels. And another really good one is your inflammatory markers. And these then give you much broader insight into whether there is something that you need to be more concerned about. And then we've got this visceral fat. Now, this is something as nutritionists we can help people to become aware of. This abdominal fat, that's role is to protect your organs. So it's generally found around the liver and the pancreas, sometimes called active fat. And we don't really want this to get out of hand. There's very strict recommendations of what our visceral fat is. And although really it's all kind of a bit of guesswork with the markers that we have, we can do body composition testing, which compares our fat versus our muscle to give an indication of whether the visceral fat needs to be something to be concerned about. Is looking at this kind of regional fat distribution. Really, that's what it's doing, and you can use the body composition machines in chemists, they often have them, and also sometimes they have them in gyms. We tend to go round and use them, as I say. And the other thing you could do as well, there is the British Heart Foundation has a waist measurement guideline. That's another idea. So you can have a look at your waist measurement. Another idea. I prefer the body composition testing because it gives you lots of interesting markers. And really, we know that if we have high visceral fat, this is going to be an indication that we perhaps need to, you know, address our diets, because it's now been found to be a marker for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and other metabolic issues such as cardio issues. And so other things just to be aware of, erectile dysfunction and low testosterone. These have also been found to be linked with heart issues. And of course, stress itself, which we know that raising our stress levels can raise our blood pressure. It raises our hormone, our stress hormone, cortisol, and can restrict blood flow to the heart. So really important when you know that you have these triggers, that you can then take steps to undo that stress, to revert. You can't exactly undo it, but you can make sure you don't stay stressed. The problem with stress, when we release this cortisol, is that what tends to happen, particularly in the modern world, is it tends to stay raised because we don't naturally do much to bring us back into that parasympathetic, that calming state. And that's where, once we know our triggers, we can start to make sure that we put in place ways to de-stress, to go into this parasympathetic mode. And we'll talk about that a bit later. So another area, and I think really the key with mentioning the male cancers, is just to remind people about these areas. They're often, you know, areas we don't commonly talk about, and if anything changes in these areas, then that is the time to, if anything changes in our bowel health, if anything changes with regards to prostate health, behavior, you know, with urine flow, these kind of issues, they should be checked out. If things seem abnormal, it's worth getting them checked out. So prostate cancer, which develops in the prostate, this small walnut gland that's part of the man's reproductive system, is really connected. What's tricky with prostate cancer is it seems to have very similar side effects as this non-benign prostatic hyperplasia. So this issue was men aging and having a non-cancerous overgrowth of the prostate that obstructs urine flow. And I think there tends to be this kind of light-hearted banter with guys that this happens when they age. And so they don't really consider that it might not be the benign issue. It could be something more serious. So I think it's always just wise to know, you know, if anything changes, always just mention it to your GP. Actually, again, talking about useful places to go to, you know, there's loads and loads of great information about the prostate and prostate cancer on the prostate cancer charity page. So I can't actually remember. Jade might have to kindly look that up for me because I can't actually remember what it's called. But that could be a brilliant place to start to get clarity on if there's anything to worry about. And some of these other issues that these other cancers, actually diet can play quite a big role here on supporting and reducing the likelihood of these cancers, particularly colorectal cancer. So we're going to talk about that later as well. So knowing that liver disease is becoming more prolific, particularly in the UK, I thought it was worth mentioning and reminding. Nutritionists constantly kind of talk about looking after your liver, because although we know that detoxification is the job of the liver, of course it is, clearing away unwanted toxins, poisons and hormones it's like its role all the time. But if we overwhelm the liver, such as in alcoholism, we know that we can increase our likelihood of alcoholic fatty liver disease. But there seems to be more evidence now growing that perhaps diet is involved in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and alcoholic fatty liver disease seem to be very similar under the microscope, with this this accumulation of fat in the liver tissue. But with this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, it's not with excessive alcohol consumption. And instead, it appears to be related to metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. So probably it often seems alcohol is involved, but there's not this direct relationship. And it could be from a lot of the information, one of the major factors seems to be sugar, particularly fructose, which has to get broken down through the liver. And fructose is being added, it's a fruit sugar, so it's something that we tend to have quite regularly anyway, but it seems to be these high amounts and these processed fructose, something called high fructose corn syrup, which is added to, for instance, it's involved in fizzy drinks. And this seems to be playing a part in this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And because issues with our liver brings very few symptoms, it can really kind of shock people when they get diagnosed with this. And we don't have to be particularly overweight, because it's really more to do with our diet itself rather than being overweight. So just thinking about, what does my diet look like? Am I relying too much on sugar? And could this be an area that I need to watch, not just because of my overall health, but because of the risks involved with causing liver damage? Thank you. So I've just got another post in the chat box, which is really helpful. That sounds fantastic. Thanks for sharing that in there. So what about obesity? We're kind of suggesting that some of these conditions, obesity would be linked with them. And yes, certainly that's true. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, particularly when we look at levels of obesity, because what we can do, and I'm so sorry to my brother because I use him as an analogy here every time, but he was so joyous when he went to the GP recently and got told he wasn't obese, he was just in the overweight category. And I mean, that's great. I'm glad that happened for him. But I felt a bit concerned because globally, more males are diagnosed with diabetes than females, despite the fact that we as females are more likely to be obese. So obesity itself is more common in women, and yet more men seem to develop type 2 diabetes. In fact, in 2013, there were 14 million times more men affected globally with diabetes than women. So that is a massive figure. And it seems to be that men are getting diagnosed at a lower body mass index. So maybe we shouldn't be relying so much on just this body mass index, this slipping from overweight into obese is just, again, one marker. And we need to be looking at these other markers as well, because that it could be, too late if we're just relying on that alone. And so maybe also connected with this is testosterone, because as we seem to be seeing this decline in testosterone, and testosterone regulates fat storage and insulin and shifts that distribution of body fat. So thinking about that visceral fat we talked about, which often accumulates in larger amounts as we age, is there a link between obesity and low testosterone and this or low testosterone and early type 2 diabetes? So there seems to be a much more confusing picture than perhaps we give it credit for. And I think knowing things like your visceral fat levels and your cholesterol and your triglycerides, for instance, it's just some of these markers would enable you to get clearer insight before you worried about what your BMI was saying. And of course, on top of that, you've got to consider possibly having a blood glucose test. So let's just take a little bit more of a look into testosterone, because I think it's an area that perhaps is not given enough credit, guys, because there is age-related decline of testosterone. It is much more gradual than women. So there's only about 1 to 2% a year. So it's much less rapid than the menopause. So due to this, I think often this is why it doesn't get talked about. It was given this label andropause from a study in 2015 that looked into this decline of hormones. And, yes, okay, perhaps because it's much more gradual, perhaps it's not so much attention's paid to it. And I don't think it's as clear as often it is with female health in terms of the obvious decline. There's not this stop as there is in the menopause, so you can't therefore know when would be a good time to potentially supplement. And it could be you don't ever need to supplement, but I think what needs to be, people, guys, women as well, living with these guys, need to be aware of is, if they have a really wide range of symptoms that could be connected with low testosterone, then maybe they might be the sort of person that's worth looking into supporting that testosterone deficiency. And some of the other areas that we might be thinking about with testosterone deficiency are muscle pain, weight loss or weight gain, nervousness and irritability, insomnia. These are very similar to declining estrogen, depression, crying spells, sweating, palpitations, headaches, and this hesitancy or frequency of urine flow. So a huge wide range of symptoms to be mindful of. And something else that came up when I was looking at testosterone was this link to whether or not it was involved in the reason that men seem to be more severely affected from viruses such as flu and pneumonia and obviously COVID-19. It's not that they are any more likely or less likely to get infected, but it seems to be the symptoms seem to be more severe. And there was a lot of research initially in Europe when this was spotted as to why this might be. And actually, many of the issues that we've just talked about are likely to be connected to that. And also, men's immune systems seem to react differently to women's immune systems. So there's a high range of reasons, but testosterone was also looked at because estrogen seemed to be a more protective hormone than testosterone. So it was looking at whether or not testosterone made a difference. But it's actually one of those ones that was the research that I came across was very inconclusive, because when chap is fighting COVID-19, actually just testosterone is depleted in its one of its immune responses. So so it's quite tricky to kind of be sure. So I would say that's kind of in the pot with everything else there. But I guess the most important thing on it, the most important message here is, you know, it's really important to take care of your health for more than just the obvious reasons that we've talked about and that we know about, but these other issues that you might not have considered, such as response to viruses. So whenever I do get to this slide, I always imagine all you lovely chaps looking like him. So I kind of put it in to sort of say, right, okay, you've got through the heavy stuff, well done. The last bit of heavy stuff is the importance of sleep. And the reason that we put this in is because as men are more likely to push boundaries, they're more likely to not kind of take the sleep to, you know, recognize its importance. And actually it's essential to supporting testosterone. And that's because testosterone is regulated by your circadian rhythm, and it works in the same way. So it peaks in the morning and wanes in the afternoon. I'm not too sure if that means, you know, if you did your exercise in the morning, you might be a bit more strong. If you're less, you know, if you're more grounded in the morning, you guys probably know best, but it does work in the same way. So poor sleep affects testosterone levels, plus sleep is essential for producing and metabolizing reproductive hormones. In fact, sleep patterns drive the synthesis, secretion and metabolism of reproductive hormones. So really important that you focus on your, you know, recognizing how important sleep is to your overall health. And so while we're on this subject, you know, don't nod off. I'm getting to the good bit, but I thought before we did get to the recommendations, I would just do a little bit of a breathing exercise. I think it's a moment to kind of remember how to get into that parasympathetic mode. You know, this whole hour of your time today is really education, but also it's a bit of time for you. So I think this is a really nice exercise. It's a chap called Dr. Andrew Weil. He's a German chap, so it's Weil. And he designed this 4-7-8 breathing technique because he felt it was very simple and short, but effective enough to put us in that parasympathetic mode. And one area that we don't really talk about enough is how breathing goes very shallow and short when we're stressed and when we're up against it. And so in order to relax our blood vessels, actually by breathing through our nose, we're producing nitric oxide, which opens up our blood vessels and supports blood pressure. You know, even just taking, this is, you know, like 30 seconds a couple of times a day can have a huge long-term benefit to health. Something that really ideally we put in a couple of times a day, every day. It's also quite beneficial for sleep. You can do this exercise just before you go to bed and, you know, help get rid of some of that cortisol and support your sleep. So what it is you basically, I don't know if anyone's done this one, but what you do is you breathe in for 4 through your nose. That's really important. You hold for 7 and then you breathe out for 8. The other thing always to do if you're doing this kind of breathing exercise is to do a big whoosh out first. So get rid of that stale air before you do it. So I'll just talk you through we'll have a little go doing it twice. So get rid of all that stale air and then go in through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's quite tricky. It's important to do it a few times to get the gist of it. And sometimes people struggle with the out because it's quite a long out. And that's fine. You know, you just getting in the habit of it really. And even just slowing your breath down a little bit and then moving to getting these ones can be helpful. I'm going to give it a run through one more time because I think it's so important to try and get the hang of it and take this moment. So ready? So in through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And do feel free to look up Andrew. As I say, I will put his name on the. You might go off it when you see him, or he might encourage you. He's slightly crazy. He's got a YouTube video. So let's move on to our key foundations for good health, our practical tips. And probably no surprise, the first practical tip, if you don't have a blood pressure machine, is to get one. Secondly, I mean, you guys might, either be pro going to your GP, or you might prefer to do private testing. There's lots of private testing companies now, and many of these tests can be done with a simple blood test at home, where you prick your finger, put the results into either a tube, or mostly you get a little tube, you send it back, and then they send you the results, depending on the test and everything, and depending on what you want to find out. But another alternative, really, and or if you have any private healthcare, just options really of what is the easiest thing for you. I found that the liver function test, generally the GPs do quite regularly anyway. So, but it's just getting that more detail sometimes on things like cholesterol and triglycerides. So how about embrace your veg? Why does that seem so important? Well, in 2018, only 28% of adults were meeting their UK recommended 5 a day. And the report found that fewer men than women met the guidelines. And the guidelines were based on the World Health Organization's recommendations that consuming 400 grams of fruit and veg per day can reduce the risk of chronic diseases. And within that was heart disease, stroke, and some cancers, including colorectal cancer, which we talked about being found more frequently in men. So really, this is something that we should all be thinking about doing, but really just looking at vegetables initially. We don't really want to go too crazy down the fruit increasing. So when we have this 5 a day, many of us think, oh, we can have a glass of orange juice, or we can bung loads of fruit in a smoothie and job done. But unfortunately, that sweetness we're generating from high fructose juices, or from creating these fruit smoothies, is not going to help. This is where we're getting that higher fructose that might be not supporting blood sugars and not supporting non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we should be aiming for that 5 a day to be our veg. And then any bonus fruit, some berries, apples, whatever you like on top of that is great. But these phytonutrients found in vegetables should be our first port of call. And whether you just roast a bit more veg with your potatoes, whether you try and change a sandwich to a salad or an open sandwich at lunchtime, can make a huge difference. We're really not just looking at vitamins and minerals here. We're looking at these plant-based nutrients that have the potential to support sex hormone conversion, reduce oxidative damage, and reduce inflammation. But we need to really make sure we're sort of tempering this with high amounts of fruit. And then doing that is also going to mean that we're boosting fibre as well. And boosting our fibre is essential to supporting good health. It supports cholesterol because good fibre supports regularity. So we're going to be getting rid of excess cholesterol. We're also going to be improving overall health because we're getting in more plant-based phytonutrients from things like seeds, chia seeds shown here, and flax seeds. Beetroot is shown here because it's amazing veg for fibre, but also is great to support blood sugar. And also increased vegetables supports heart health. So there's this huge benefit of just thinking of ways to get more fibre. I think when we talk about fibre, sometimes we can be a little bit kind of thrown that we need to start having bran flakes for breakfast and things like that. But porridge still stands as a great choice. Having berries on the top and putting these nuts and seeds on the top can be a really, really good choice. The beta glucans really help get rid of excess cholesterol. But other things for breakfast, such as bircher muesli, can also be a great choice. Obvious, I guess, but keeping that sugar, it's always, you know, it's like a weekly reminder to us all, keeping sugar and alcohol in check, giving that liver a little rest whenever we can, will be really helpful to supporting its detoxification processes. And, you know, obviously doing all of that at the same time, the sugar and the alcohol can be a bit much. So just focus on what, you know, where you think you really do struggle, and then maybe just gradual reduction in that area. So thinking about you know, having that break for a few days in the week for that alcohol. You know, can you go a weekend, you know, without alcohol? Those kind of things, whatever you feel is a good idea for you. Knowing that exercise is absolutely critical for health. Really here I'm talking about exercise as huge investment for heart health, but also remembering that muscle building has an impact on our insulin sensitivity and our testosterone, as well as bringing mental health benefits. And it doesn't mean becoming, you know, a gym bunny. You just have to remember that you know, that getting that resistance training in, that moderate to high intensity. I'm going to brag now that I'm doing 100 squats a day for Macmillan Cancer this month, and it's flipping hard. But I break it down, and it's 50 and 50. What in the like 50 in the morning, 50 in the afternoon, and it is doable, and it's not even that time consuming really. So just getting in these exercises that are large muscle mass, so some press ups, some squats, so important as well. Once we kind of even past 30, we start to lose some of our muscles, so getting this muscle building in, supporting testosterone, supporting keeping our building our muscles is so important. And obviously constant low level natural movement, but probably people don't realize there was a study of lower physical activity and higher levels of TV watching, which was in healthy young men that were, you know, just not really doing enough movement, found lower sperm count. So, you know, it's probably more. We always talk about these kind of things in terms of weight loss, but actually the benefits are way beyond weight loss, and we should probably be selling exercise for that reason, really. Stand up to your couch session on Friday. I love that, Emma. I think you need to tell everyone a bit more about that, because that sounds brilliant. That sounds exactly the type of thing that we're talking about. And then watching your stress. Really the message here is I'm not a big fan of telling people exactly what to do, because I think we should all find our own de-stressing. I've spent ages feeling guilty that I'm not very good at mindfulness, but it turns out I'm just not. So, you know, let's not worry about that. Do something else. But I think what's really important here is making sure that as a man, you know, you might need some time alone. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that they unwind more efficiently and effectively with some time alone. You know, the man shed was kind of a bit of a joke, but actually there's way more research behind that than perhaps we give credit for. So if that's you, then you need, and you haven't got a shed, then think about what else you could do to spend some time. Thanks, Jade. Sorry about that. But I think women are terrible. We don't let our guys go and spend some time alone. And it's really important, you know, so we need to know that as women, we need to know that. So some tips for sleep. This is very brief tips about sleep, but I loved this study which showed that protein for breakfast improved perceived sleep quality and sleep onset. And these people were versus breakfast skippers. So some had high protein and some didn't have any breakfast. And the high protein was really found to be beneficial for sleep. So we're looking at things like eggs, maybe a good quality protein shake with low fruit, thinking about the nuts and the seeds. Just a few nuts and seeds on some porridge can make a really big difference to our intake of protein and help us avoid snacking in the morning. And also reducing our screen time, so being mindful not to be looking at screens till too late at night, which is so hard to do. I really recognize that, but if you do find it difficult to turn them off, make sure they're on nighttime mode where your screens turn orange. And then it's marginally better for our circadian rhythm. It can help to produce melatonin, where with the blue light from the screen, we really struggle to produce that melatonin, which means we're going to struggle to get to sleep. And so these last couple of suggestions were based on research into a manly diet, or the common male diet, which did seem to include increased meat, maybe more fast food, more processed foods. And, you know, this can be a huge change to our health by getting rid of some of that processed food. But included in that is reducing intake of meat, making sure that we have meat less often and good quality. The actual means that the meat that we're having then has got a different nutritional structure, so it's going to be more beneficial to health. It has a higher level of things like omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, compared to omega-6, which is more inflammatory. So just trying to think about how much meat is going into your diet, and could you have perhaps a couple of days which are completely meat free. This research about thinking about plant-based protein was found to give in fact, I'm not at all vegan, and there is some nutrients you have to be cautious of if you go down the vegan route. I think, however, moving over to more plant-based protein, I cannot find any evidence that is saying this is bad. To be honest, most of the evidence is really showing. I even listened to a report the other day which was saying better outcomes for COVID with these more plant-based way of eating. So better for the planet, better reducing our risk of heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes. So just thinking about, can you put in things like these pulses, tofu, regular nuts and seeds in moderation, of course, good quality protein powders if that works for you, not essential at all. Things like maybe having veggie sausages or falafel, or these kind of options that, yeah, they are a bit processed, but they're better than the processed meat options. So and this is a lovely, like a stir-fried quinoa, which you get lots of nice protein in the quinoa, as a change from rice. And then finally, the key nutrients here are the ones that have been found to be missed in the male diet, and they've all been found to boost testosterone levels. So, for instance, zinc, which is found in some meat-based products, but also found in dark greens, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, really important for men's health and our immune system. So thinking about zinc and making sure you're getting enough. Vitamin D, the NHS guidelines suggest a supplement through the winter months, and nutritionists would 100% recommend when we lose the sun in the sky, we should be supplementing with vitamin D. And it might, if some research found if you did have a vitamin D deficiency, another brilliant one to check actually, if you are going to do a test, is vitamin D. Found that if you correct a deficiency, it can contribute to increased testosterone levels. Thinking about lycopene, you may have heard of this, had a huge study in the benefits of lycopene in the fight against prostate cancer, particularly rich in tomatoes. You can boost lycopene with actually cooking tomatoes, even leaving tomatoes out rather than storing them in the fridge boosts lycopene. So even having tomato puree is a lycopene source, so easy to get. Omega-3 fatty acids, these are these anti-inflammatory fatty acids I mentioned earlier. We tend to find them in high levels in good quality oily fish, and very heart protective. Potassium is in why we really should be, another reason why we should be focusing on things like spinach, broccoli, peas, mushrooms, sweet potatoes. These are all high in potassium, and potassium regulates heartbeat and also sort of counters sodium. So if we're eating a lot of processed food, we're going to find we get low potassium and high sodium, which is again not good for heart health. And finally, magnesium. If you find very difficult to relax, if you find you're tense and stressed and struggle with sleep, you could be magnesium deficient. These great sources of magnesium in whole grains and dark green leafy veg. Also dark chocolate, my favorite source of magnesium. And, you know, deficiency again can lead to lower testosterone. So thinking about perhaps even trying some Epsom salts or magnesium salts in your bath to support magnesium levels. So we'll send all these resources over to you guys, and Jade will make sure you get all these resources. We've just got a couple of recipes and a couple of handouts there for you. And these were the links, which I think I also got some book recommendations. I thought The Life-Changing Magic of Sheds might appeal to some people. So thank you so much. I've missed some of these chat box things. Any other Q? We've got a few minutes for a few more questions if you've got any. Tom, no, I need to tell you, lifting a pint does not count as great for the biceps. You could kind of like do 20 press ups and then lift the pint. I've just read David's response in response to Tom. I thought that was an entirely separate thing. That has made me chuckle. Any serious questions before I depart?
I think there's just one in there, Julie, about how do you know if you're, apologies, my little boy in the background. How do you know if you're vitamin D deficient?
Oh, okay, great. I did miss that. So vitamin D deficiency, joint pain, aching joints, and joint pain is one that I found from people anecdotally. Also kind of fatigue-y type symptoms can be vitamin D. It's one really that is worth getting tested. Really cheap to get tested, about 40 quid. You can send off for a test and just find out for yourself. So if you've got any kind of suspicions, if you don't, if you don't like the sun, if you didn't sunbathe in the summer, what we had of it, it didn't go away, and now we're entering in the winter, it's worth getting tested, it really is, and just checking in with it.
I think Julie, there's just another one about any food recommendations for vitamin D.
Yeah, unfortunately, vitamin D is very, very low in food. The best sources are some dairy and also some non-dairy milks, because they are fortified with vitamin D. So going through that fortified foods, you see quite a lot of vitamin D added in the sort of, if you like, the the non-dairy, I was going to say the fake dairy products. So they're quite good choices. No veg apart from mushrooms. If you see mushrooms that are rich in vitamin D, that's because those particular mushrooms have been left in the sun and they soak up the vitamin D, but no other fruit and veg actually absorb vitamin D. Oily fish is another reasonable source, but they're all the sources are very low. So particularly if you're deficient, you wouldn't get enough from food. That's the trouble. So it's one of the few things that we do suggest can very often require supplementation. Have I missed anything else?
I think there's just one, there's two little final things in there. So what dose should I take of vitamin D during the winter time?
Okay, so the NHS suggests 400 IU in the winter. I think that's 10 units, but it should be 400 IU. I mean, I would always say test because you might need more, but that's kind of the safe amount that's recommended.
And then just for a final question, Julie, what would you say is the best way to reduce fatty liver? Just in case they've missed.
That's a really good question. Definitely having more plant-based foods in your diet, watching that sugar, watching that fructose, being very mindful of how much sugar is maybe sneaking in unknowingly. So processed foods, thinking about things that are really unwittingly, like pasta sauces and things like that. Those kind of things we need to be very careful of. And certainly fizzy drinks. But even as I say, the high sugars. Oh, I suddenly got all of that come in. I hadn't seen any of those questions.
I think that was all of the questions, Julie, looking through the chat box.
Super.
So thank you very much for today, Julie. I know I've definitely found it really helpful. I'm sure everybody else has enjoyed it. So thanks everybody for attending. And I've put some links in the chat box if anyone wants to take a look, resources on our health and wellbeing page, and there are still some places available on future sessions this week. So thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone. Thanks guys. Thank you for your tips and your support on the chat box. Cheers.